So what is a transfer under GDPR? Well, we'll answer that and deal with Brexit, and stay with us for the 5 key things you need to know about what is a transfer. Hi, I'm Robert Bohr, the founder and CEO of Keepable, the award-winning solution saving you time, money and stress on privacy, giving you a great answer for the board and customers. This video is part of Privacy Kitchen, free video help on all things privacy. If you're new here, please do click subscribe. Links are in the notes as always. So what is a transfer under GDPR? Well, like so many things, it isn't explicitly defined, but it is implicitly defined and circuitously defined all the way through. We'll focus on the EU GDPR to start with, as the rules are identical in the UK GDPR, and we'll deal with Brexit at the end, so stick with us. Now, Recital 101, believe it or not, of GDPR defines transfer as well as anywhere else and tells us clearly why it matters. It says, when personal data are transferred from the EU to controllers, processors and other recipients in third countries or to international organisations, the level of protection of natural persons ensured by the GDPR should not be undermined, including in cases of onward transfers of personal data from the third country or international organisation to controllers, processors, other recipients in the same or another third country or international organisation. So the first transfer and the second, etc. So we can immediately see the whole idea of transfers is to make sure that personal data stays protected when it's transferred outside the EU GDPR's jurisdiction to either a third country or an international organisation, whether once, twice or more. It makes sense when you think about it. You shouldn't be able to just avoid GDPR's rules and obligations just by exporting data outside the EEA, for example. So what is a third country? Well, this is pretty easy. The EU GDPR applies in the EU, that's been extended to the EEA, and we've seen the transfer system is designed to protect personal data when it leaves the GDPR's direct protection. So a third country is simply any country other than a member state of the EEA, the European Economic Area. Okay, what's an international organisation, or IO? Well, happily this is defined, and as our first key point on transfers, this is definitely not as you'd expect. An international organisation, or IO for GDPR, is most definitely not a typical multinational corporation. It's not Ford, Toyota or anyone like this. It's defined as an organisation and its subordinate bodies governed by public international law, or any body which is set up by or on the basis of an agreement between 2 or more countries. Now, examples are always great, and the European Data Protection Supervisor gives us these excellent examples of what IOs are. There's the Council of Europe, there's the International Committee of the Red Cross, Interpol, the UN itself, the UNHCR, European Space Agency, CERN and WIPO. You can see it's definitely not an international business like Shell or Apple or Google. Now, there may be some technical argument about whether IOs are covered by or exempt from GDPR, but let's just assume that they're exempt, and that's why they're referred to in the transfer structure. And our second key point to note about transfers, an IO can be within the EEA and it's still a transfer. So we can see that transfers to IOs are pretty rare for the vast majority of organisations, particularly if you're private sector, you probably never deal with one. So let's look a bit more at what a transfer actually is, and let's look at one major thing that's included and a minor thing that isn't, but is still important to know. A transfer clearly happens when you literally give personal data to someone, physically or electronically, who is outside the EEA or is an IO. So our third key point, and one of the most fundamental points about transfers, and it's not always appreciated at all, is a transfer also happens when you simply make personal data available. The UK ICO gives a good example. If you load personal data onto a UK server that's then available through a website, and you plan or anticipate the website can be accessed from outside the EEA, you should treat that as a transfer. In more practical terms, say you've set up in-house or outsourced follow-the-sun support or ops teams. They're probably, say, in the US, Europe, India, Hong Kong, and they simply access your CRM database that's in the EU without downloading any data. That's still a transfer to the US, India, Hong Kong, etc. of any personal data they can access. Now, our fourth key point is that transit is not transfer. So if personal data is moved from one EEA member state to another, but just transit outside the EEA on its way there, that's not a transfer. The UK ICO gives a good example. They talk about personal data moving from a controller in France to a controller in Ireland, both countries in the EEA, via a server in Australia. There's no intention that the personal data will be accessed or manipulated while it's in Australia. It's just transiting through. Therefore, the movement is only to Ireland, so for GDPR, it's not a transfer. Now, in common parlance, transfer is you give the data to somebody else, you've transferred that data to someone. So the UK ICO does use the word transfer in that example, but we've changed it to the word move to make it clearer. So you can see we've got to be a bit careful with the word transfer, because in normal parlance, yes, transferring data from France to Ireland is transferring the data to somebody else. But in GDPR speak, a transfer is outside the EEA or to an international organisation. Now, our fifth key point is about Brexit. So until the end of 2020, the UK is treated as part of the EEA under the EU GDPR. So the GDPR applies here, as it did before, and that also applies to transfers. So for the purpose of transfers, we're deemed still in the UK to be within the EEA until the end of 2020. But unless something happens beforehand, from 1st January 2021, the UK will be a third country under the EU GDPR. Personal data sent to or accessed from the UK will be a transfer for EU GDPR. And the UK will have its own UK GDPR with exactly the same transfer structure. But that's much simpler to understand under the UK GDPR. It's when personal data is being sent outside or accessed from outside the UK. So there you are, transfers under GDPR and 5 key points to know. Please do look at our other Privacy Kitchen videos. Do visit us at keepable.com. We have a great way to track and manage your transfers using our award-winning SaaS solution. Please do use #PrivacyKitchen to tell us the topics and questions you want covered. Stay well in the meantime. See you soon in Privacy Kitchen.